is the benefit of this tech function worth it to me to introduce a product into my child's or my teenager's environment that may not ultimately be supportive of a play-based approach because it is not allowing for this protected space. And you may think, sure, there are benefits to knowing how many steps you've taken, and that actually might make my child more playful in some ways because they'll want to run around more. Or you may think, gosh, my conception of play is being able to take risks and to innovate and not have that preserved in any way. So I'm just not going to give my child any smartwatch. It doesn't matter what the terms and conditions say. This is something they don't need in their play space.
That was our guest today, Leah Plunkett. Leah is an associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard and an associate dean at the University of New Hampshire School of Law. More importantly, for the purpose of this episode, Leah is the author of the book Sharenthood, in which she discusses the challenges of sharing the lives of children online. In this episode, Leah talks with us about the challenges of sharenting and why it's such an important topic now. Leah also discusses with us the importance of values-based parenting in digitised spaces and the role of other digital products in the lives of children. I hope you enjoy this episode with Leah Plunkett. Okay, so let's get underway. Leah, thank you so much for spending time with us here on Digital Mindfulness. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you about your work and also understanding exactly what sharenting is and how that manifests in everyday life. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So Leah, tell the audience, if you would, more about yourself and in particular how you came to be focused on this particular topic, because this is quite a unique area of the digital literacy sector.
I am an associate professor and associate dean at University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law in Concord, New Hampshire. I'm also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. And in those roles, I teach my law students. I help oversee our law school programming. And as a scholar, I look at kids, families, digital life, and the law. And I came to that topic because I'm a mom of 2 young kids. When I started looking at the topic, I was the mom of 1 child, then I had another. And I just started seeing more and more pictures in my own social media feeds of ultrasounds and infants. And then as my kids got older, toilet training and temper tantrums. And I was posting myself. And I got really curious to figure out how we as parents and also teachers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other trusted adults might want to rethink our engagement with the way we share or not our kids' digital information. So I wrote this book not because I had all the answers, but because I knew I didn't have all the answers.
So Leah, you've written this fabulous new book, Sharenthood, and I wonder if we can focus on that a little bit, and in particular the name. What does sharenting actually mean, and why is that so important to think about now?
Sharenting means slightly different things to different people. Sharenting typically means what parents post on social media about kids. In my definition, while what parents do on social media is a very important part of sharenting, I think to properly and fully understand sharenting, we need to define it more broadly. So I define sharenting as all the ways that parents, teachers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, coaches, and all trusted adults in children's lives engage digitally with kids' private information. So social media is a big part of that, but sharenting also encompasses the ways that we use smart devices in our homes, or AI assistants, or using Fitbits or fitness trackers on our kids. So really anything and everything where you have a parent or other adult taking children's private information and sharing it, having it aggregated, analyzed, reshared, really any activity that involves the digital transmission of that information by the adult.
I think this is absolutely fascinating, and I want to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned, and that was, you mentioned about social media and all of these other mediums of sharing, but you also mentioned things like smart speakers, and I'm wondering how sharing actually takes place via those. Are you thinking that it's more things like ambient surveillance of kids?
Ambient surveillance is a huge part of it, but depending on what kinds of smart devices we're using in our homes, it can be more than ambient surveillance. So if we're giving our kids smart toys, for instance, they are interacting directly and conversationally with those toys. So that information is likely not staying just on the device, but is likely being aggregated, likely analyzed, acted upon, reshared by the underlying software or other digital system that is powering that device's intelligence. So anytime we have a smart device in our home, the phrase ambient surveillance captures it perfectly. It's including our kids. And then there are those smart devices targeted at our kids that we may be giving them to engage with.
I want to focus a bit more on the book now because again, of course, the idea of sharing is fascinating. But what was also interesting was that you didn't say that as a whole sharing or sharing our kids' lives online is not universally bad, but rather it's something that's context dependent, and that it's up to the parents or the caregivers to understand when that context is correct, when it is right to share parts of our kids' lives online.
So I believe that what we need to do as parents, teachers, and other trusted adults is to reflect differently on whether, when, how, why, and with whom we parent. Parenting is not all bad. Some parenting is inevitable, and some parenting can be very positive. So one family who is raising values-based benefits for that family from connecting with other families in similar positions, with new medical information, with support groups, that the values that that family may choose to place on forging connections and breaking down a sense of isolation may well outweigh the privacy concerns. And that's just one of many examples of the way in which, if you have values-based reflection on your parenting and other choices, you can find yourself in a position where it makes a lot of sense to parent, but you do want to do it following reflection and in a values-based way.
One of the things that you write about in the book, Leah, is this whole idea of value-based parenting, which I thought was a fascinating idea. And I wonder if you would share with us different ways that parents can apply that thinking to their everyday lives, because again, as an idea, it's absolutely fascinating, but how can you actually bring that down to when you're working with kids every single day in these digitized environments?
Yes, I agree. And so I actually think that where we can all start in our individual lives is just with some quiet self-reflection, either just limited to our own self-reflection or drawing on a partner or friend or relative or colleague. And I would encourage folks to just start with a very simple, what's important to me in my interactions with the kids in my life. And it may be important to you, for instance, to have a lot of space to play, for kids to make mischief, even make a few mistakes, and grow up better for having made them. And if that is something you value, that kind of iterative, experimental space, then you don't have to get right to reading the terms and conditions of use of a product, but you can think, well, what really promotes play? And not just in the moment, video games, but what will help my child or a child in my care become curious and creative and flexible. And you may decide that something that would help with that would be to have spaces that are a little more protected, where if your child is engaged in an activity, you're not recording it and preserving it because you want it to be protected, to be playful and experiential.
I think it's really interesting, Leah, that the words that you use to describe this really focus on the individual responsibility of the person, of the caregiver in question. And I think that is that's incredibly important, because it's not so much that it's the responsibility of the companies, although they do bear some responsibility, but it's not their entire responsibility to create better experiences for people, but rather it's our own. We have to do this ourselves.
It is. And I think that gets us now to a place where we really need to be looking to tech companies themselves, but let's be realistic, the lawmakers and regulators who oversee tech companies, because we have not seen, for most tech providers, a whole lot of willingness to really meaningfully innovate around privacy. There are some, but as an industry, the tech sector at this point is making its money on gathering and acting upon and resharing our data. So I do think that one thing that would benefit us here in the US, for example, is having a nutrition style privacy label on any commercially available personal tech product. So the same way we walk into a grocery store and we can see really quickly how many calories, how much fat, how much protein, we should be able to pick up a fitness tracker or look at a new app and say, oh, here are the 5 types of data it's taking about me, and by extension my kids if I'm sharing about them. Here's the list of places where the data is going, and here are the list of uses to which it's being put. So for us to really, as individuals, be able to understand and act upon privacy policies and terms and conditions of use, we do need them to be more clearly and concisely given to us. But even in a world where that hasn't yet happened, there are still ways, short of reading all the terms and conditions and privacy policies, that parents, grandparents, and so on can make better parenting choices that are values-based. So to get back to this idea of the value of play and saying, I want my children and my adolescents to have some experimental, iterative, yet protected spaces. And then you think, what goes into that kind of space? And you don't have to read all of the terms and conditions and privacy policies of a smart toy or a watch that tracks movement to know that those toys are going to be taking and very likely sharing, analyzing, aggregating, and at some point acting upon your child's private information. And so then, again, even without reading the terms and conditions or privacy policies, you may think, is the benefit of this tech function worth it to me to introduce a product into my child's or my teenager's environment that may not ultimately be supportive of a play-based approach because it is not allowing for this protected space? And you may think, sure, there are benefits to knowing how many steps you've taken, and that actually might make my child more playful in some ways because they'll want to run around more. Or you may think, gosh, my conception of play is being able to take risks and to innovate and not have that preserved in any way. So I'm just not going to give my child any smartwatch. It doesn't matter what the terms and conditions say. This is something they don't need in their play space. Train your child's privacy without necessarily any clear values-based benefit to balance against the privacy law.
So Leah, what would you say then are some of the consequences of oversharing, I guess unconscious oversharing?
I put activities by data brokers or other companies that are working behind the scenes, so not really visible to parents, and aggregating analyzing, and either acting upon themselves or giving to other entities to act upon kids' private information. We know from a recent study by CLIP, the Center on Law and Information Policy at Fordham Law School in New York City, that data brokers, which are private for-profit companies that are in the business of aggregating, analyzing, and selling intimate information, we know from this study that these data brokers have information on file from kids as young as 2 years old. And that information may never get sold by the broker, or it could get sold to another private company that wants to do marketing. It could get sold to a future employer. There are so many ways that information could be used by other people and entities now or in the future of our kids' lives to make predictions about them. And last but certainly not least is the category of harm to our child's own sense of self and ability to build relationships now and in the future with other people. So in this category, I would put bullying that can arise out of sharenting. And I do hear stories when I talk to folks about this book of, gosh, I posted what I thought was a cute picture of my child when they were 8. Then they got to middle school. Their peers found the picture and made fun of them for it. So that's a really real threat to our kids, is that the way we talk about them, particularly when they're younger, can and probably will be used against them by their peers when they're older. And we're also getting in the way of our kids' own autonomy and sense of agency and ability to develop their own connections and forge their own reputation as they grow up.
This is incredibly interesting. And, you know, if parents didn't have enough on their plate with bringing up their kids and doing that to the best of their ability, they now have to be information and data literate, because, you know, all of these that you're describing now, these are very much unintended consequences of raising a child in a digitized age. And I'm sure that with greater literacy of data and of information, that these are things that parents absolutely wouldn't do, or they would think twice about.
Exactly. I think that by definition these days, the full scope now and going forward of what digital technologies are doing with our data is very hidden from us. And when I say by definition, I mean that most, maybe not all, but most providers of digital products and services are in the data business. So the product that we think of as, oh, this is so cute and helpful. I can now have a baby booty that's sensor enabled that tells me how my child's sleep is. Or even the phones that we all carry around all the time. Isn't this convenient? I have a mini computer in my pocket. Well, these products are engineered. They're designed so that we see them as familiar, non-threatening parts of our everyday environment, when actually all of them, no matter how helpful they are, have a component to them that involves data acquisition, data aggregation, and different forms of surveillance. And we don't see that. Maybe we would if they were all required to come with a giant warning label that said this product is spyware, but we're not going to see that happen ever.
For me, this was the larger issue that really came into focus when reading the book, that actually what you were writing about was the ethical use of data, and just how important that is for parents and for caregivers to make better decisions when sharing the lives of children online, and in particular, this is an issue that people need to know more about, particularly those companies we know very little about, such as the data brokers, because it's all of this information that parents and caregivers just don't have at the moment.
I agree. And I think that as we, as the general public, are seeing more we are asking tougher questions of these companies. We're making greater demands, and I mean that in a good way, of our lawmakers and regulators, because revelations like the one from the New York Times this fall, that photos of toddlers on social media back in 2004, 2005 were taken and used to train what the Times called bleeding edge surveillance technology, the facial recognition software. People are deeply disturbed by that. It feels, and it is, like a real invasion of protected space. And we as a society tend to get very protective of our private spaces when we realize that they're being intruded upon.
Can you see a point, Leah, where there'll be federal level regulation in place to protect data and to enforce greater transparency in the same way that we have in the EU with GDPR?
There needs to be. And unlike many issues in the United States right now, there is bipartisan energy around and interest in moving in this direction. Unfortunately, I don't see anything coming down the pike that is likely to be in effect anytime soon. But I do take heart from things like the Federal Trade Commission's recent call for public comment to review the rule implementing COPPA, the Children's Online Protection Act. Now, COPPA, this federal law in the U.S., actually does not regulate sharenting. It regulates when and how and why companies can take private information directly from kids under 13. But even the fact that the FTC is dusting that off and asking for input from stakeholders, I take as a positive sign. But we in the United States are lagging behind the EU and Britain and other countries in coming up with meaningful, comprehensive, yet flexible, ethical data laws and regulations.
I think what you just said is incredibly important, not just for us when we're caring for our loved ones, our young loved ones, but also when thinking about ourselves. And that's when we do enter into a digitized space, everything is set up towards rewarding impulsivity and compulsiveness and reactions, whereas thinking about actually how our actions are going to impact on our future selves, what we might think of ourselves once we've done this action. This is not something that we generally think about in life. Perhaps we do, but certainly when we're online, this is not something we tend to think about.
It isn't, and we're not good at it in other complex domains as well. And I certainly want to be very clear that I wrote this book with the hope, and I'm so delighted that hope has become a reality, of having exactly this type of conversation. I don't think I have all the answers, or that every choice I make in my personal life should serve as a sharenting model. I don't think it should. But I think that one of the best ways for us, whether it is with sharenting or other complex domains where we're required, if we really want to set ourselves up for success, to be thinking more about our future selves, perhaps, than our current ones. There are two sources of support that I have always found particularly important, and I think others do too. One is the power of having company, whether that company is a buddy with whom you start doing an investment club so that you're being more mindful of your retirement accounts, or whether that buddy is a community of people across the country or across the world whom you've never met, but you're in touch and you are working towards the same goals. So I think company, when you're trying to make these kind of complex changes, is really important. I also think the power of small habits cannot be underestimated. And that's not to say, any of us can or should try to change every sharenting habit that we have right at once. But I really do think the little things add up to be really huge. So if somebody were to say, for instance, gosh, I'm not so sure what Facebook, not to pick on Facebook, but just use them as an example. I'm not so sure what value Facebook is adding to my life or my children's lives. Let me just take a week and do a Facebook cleanse. I'm just not going to post anything new, and I'm going to see how I feel about that. And in the time that I'm spending not posting, maybe I'll try putting my phone down completely and reading a book to my child, or reading the newspaper to myself, or, adding up how many minutes I think I was roughly spending posting and going for a walk or a run instead. I think those types of really micro habit changes and personal interventions are so meaningful.
And the good thing about tiny habits is that they're small enough and easy enough to be passed down to children.
Yes, that is right. And definitely I'll share one of the habits that I have been working on over the past few weeks, and it has not been successful every day, is leaving my phone in what we call the command center of our house. So you walk in and there's a place where the keys live and the wallets live. And I really try to put my phone down there when I come home. But I have not been succeeding every day. And I haven't been succeeding because things are busy at work and I want to make sure I don't miss anything, or I'm alarmed by political or public health news and I want my New York Times breaking news update. And my kids see that and they will call it out sometimes. And when I am working as a parent to try to impart on them the importance of reading, the importance of eye contact, the importance of conversation, they are going to start finding me, if they don't already, hypocritical, because they're seeing me with my face up to a phone. And sometimes I do explain, because it's just the reality, something important is happening at work, I need 5 minutes, and then I will focus on you and I'll put my phone down. But other times I'll catch myself and 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes have gone by and I'm still reading my breaking news update. And I'm not reading to my kids, and perhaps just as important, I'm not modeling for them that there are so many things that I can be doing, either for myself or for them, or for my spouse or for others, that don't involve looking at a screen. But it's hard. I find it hard.
Leah, one of the trends that I'm seeing now is the rise of child influencers, and how you see very young children all the way up to teens aspiring to be YouTubers and to overshare, parts of their lives or major parts of their interests. And I wonder, number one, what your opinion is on this. And number two, again, to parents and caregivers listening to this, how you would suggest they manage something like this, given the discussion we've just been having about sharenting.
I am really torn on this question, so I appreciate your asking it. And the reason I'm torn is I really deeply believe that as our children show creative aspirations, entrepreneurial aspirations, engineering aspirations, design aspirations, whatever it is that our kids want to be or build, it is amazing that we have a whole new range of digital tools and digital platforms for them to do that. And I would never want to stifle their development of their sense of agency and autonomy, or the development of digital innovation in general. So on the one hand, part of me thinks we want to make sure that we as parents are supporting that. On the other hand, I have real concerns given the current state of the internet and of digital life more broadly, where the default setting really does seem to be toward commodification and monetization. That if we are supporting our children's desire to be an influencer, to be a YouTuber, without interrogating it and thinking critically about it, then we're likely serving them up to a world where everything is about clicks and likes and sponsorships. And I'm a big proponent of the free market. I'm not promoting socialism. But I do think, especially when it comes to our kids, that if we are instilling in them from a young age that it's all about the clicks, it's all about the likes, it's all about the sponsorships, ultimately we are going to be depriving them of the protected spaces to build the personal mindset to fully reach their creative, scientific, or whatever category of aspirations they have, because we're going to be telling them that the more shallow, if you will, or superficial rewards of clicks and of money are what really matters. So I am really torn on this question.
So Leah, my final question to you then is, how do you foresee the future of parent-child engagement online, given everything that we've spoken about, and also the growing literacy of ethical data use and the impact of oversharing people's lives online? How do you foresee in 5 years that people will be interacting with their children online?
I think that as the digitally shared generation comes of age increasingly, we are going to see a course correction. So Facebook went public, 2004, 2005, became publicly available. So, you start to see kids in high school now who would be sort of the first cohort to have come of age in such an oversharented way. And we're seeing signs, both in terms of individual statements kids are making, in terms of things like a Microsoft research team report that came out this fall that found that over 40% of youth surveyed had concerns about parental sharenting. We are starting to see this generation take a look around, see what's out there about them, and say, wait a second. So I do think that regardless of how long it takes law and regulation to catch up with our new digital era, that our own kids are going to increasingly be calling us out on it. And so that we are likely to look back at this current era, this initial era of sharenting, as somewhat the way we look back on a time in the United States where seatbelts were not mandatory for kids, right? There were things that in every generation, we get a new technology or a new opportunity, we don't fully understand its parameters, and so we're very open to it. And then a generation goes by, 2 generations go by, and either through norms and practices or laws and regulations, we make some course corrections. And I think we're on the cusp of starting to see some course corrections as our own kids look at us and say, what are you doing? Or what were you doing? And we think twice about it.
I absolutely agree. Or, there is going to come a time when our kids say to us, actually, that was private. I didn't give you permission to share that.
Exactly. And this is a very small example, and I have many others, but, I'm on Facebook and I engage with my friends that way. And I saw a post the other day from some friends in my community in honor of their daughter's birthday. And I really liked it because it did not include a picture. And it said, we're celebrating our daughter today. She's old enough to request that we not share pictures of her, so we're honoring that request, but we're so happy she's in the world. And I thought, what a sweet and respectful way to share your joy and pride as a parent in your child's birthday, while also honoring the fact that she did not consent. And I don't mean consent in a legal way. Children don't get to consent or not to their parents sharenting, but consent in terms of the relationship.
That's fantastic. Leah, where is the best place for people to find out more about you and your work and connect with you?
Thank you so much for asking that. 2 great places. Leah Plunkett, LeahPlunkett.com is my author website. There is a form through that to connect with me. Also, I'm on Twitter, Leah, A as in Apple, Plunkett.
Perfect. That's incredibly easy. So, Leah, thank you so much again for spending time with us today. It was really fascinating learning about you, your work, and the book, and I wish you all the best with it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the insightful and inspiring questions.